Okay, so who want to start to make a question, to ask something to the maintainers? Yeah, go.
So I'm a very occasional contributor, and it's usually to try and address issues that we have in our deployment. But I don't write Java or JavaScript day by day, so it's a kind of context switching in is a lot of work, and so for bigger changes, it's tough. I guess my question is, Martin, I think we talked about the duplicate change issue on shutdown race, and you actually you had a great description of what you think the problem is and how you can address it. I feel like for someone like me to dive into that, it would require a lot of time, so I just haven't done it. I guess, are there ways that I can maybe be more helpful where I can be efficient so that maybe I can convince people to help me out where I'm less efficient, if that makes sense?
I don't know, have you tried vibe coding?
Not on that particular problem yet, no. I mean, maybe that's a good way to get into that problem.
I would also suggest just trying to tackle a smaller piece of it. So, because it wasn't a huge problem, but it definitely had, there's a write problem to it, then there's a read problem to it, and maybe some other problems to it, like recovery and some things. So maybe I can describe the problem. He was concerned with indexing sometimes being lost. So Gerrit stores data in the repositories and then has an index, a leucine index, and since those are two data stores effectively, it cannot do atomic updates across them. So sometimes there's a mismatch. And I was just suggesting that, before we write to either one of those, we could write a simple file, basically, that says this is where the change we're going to modify. So now, then you can go write it to the Git, index it, and if the index fails, you would see some recovery process could see that there's still an index that needs to be done. So, so just writing it to a file, that's a change, because that's useful even for other reasons. So for example, then trying to delete the file when it's done, when it's actually indexed, that's another change. So those are things maybe you could try. I'm not sure that's a good answer to your question, but
I wanted to add something. So first, with the general concept of how can you help the maintainers, from my perspective, what is really useful is very good bug reports. So if you do a very good reporting of an issue, we typically, when you create the issue, there is a template. Maybe we can improve that template. But if you make something that we, as maintainer, can reproduce the problem in the smallest set of steps to be able to see it, that will help a lot. Because in my understanding of the problems, typically, let's say 90% of the problems can be resolved with one line of code, 90%. The hardest part is first to understand where is that line of code, because there are so many, right? But even more difficult than that is understanding the problem. So because you may experience the problem in your environment, and your environment has so many different moving parts. And I will never be able to recreate that environment on my laptop or on my test environment. But if you can do some initial troubleshooting that you can only do in your environment, right? And come up with the smaller set of steps that allows me to recreate the problem, then you already got to the point where you can basically hand over the problem to me and say, Luca, I managed to recreate it. That's it. I will give you one simple example. So you know that a lot of open source projects, they don't have the funds, they don't have the time, and then they just use GitHub. But they want to use Gerrit, so they use GerritHub because they can use GitHub visibility, and as Linus Torvalds says, it's free. So why not using it, right? So they use GitHub, but then they want to use the Gerrit workflow on top, so they use GitHub. And there was one project, the Q project, that they had a very annoying problem. They were doing the fetching on the Go packages from GitHub, and sometimes, and they calculate something like 2-3% of the times, Gerrit was not providing all the objects in upload packs. And then basically their local go-get was failing because it was actually a bug in Jacek and in Gerrit because it was in Jacek. So what was really good, when they were keeping having that problem for many, many months, if not years, right? But then at a certain point they said, Luca, listen, if you do this operation on this repo, you can see it. And I can see it all the times. Then they gave me the repo was public, so they said, you just do this operation, this public repo, and you can see it. And then they handed over the problem to me, and I was able to drill down to even smaller set of operations. And then I found out that actually the unshallow operation in Jacek was written something like 12 years ago, right? It was written, and the code review was, yeah, that's good. If you look at the change, there was not even a single test. If you look at the change, they were looking just at one web walk, but not at the others. So it was clear that that piece of code was rotten, right? But of course, and that the fix was extremely small and simple. But it took such a long time for them to reproduce it, hand it over to me, and then I was able to do it. And talking about the indexing, I have to apologize because I haven't published yet the ESC minutes, the Engineering Steering Committee, but we discussed at the last ESC. I'm going to publish the minutes, promise. And we exactly analyzed the problem on transactionality, the one that Marty was talking about. And there is a commitment from the Gerrit community to solve it, right? And it's not going to be easy, absolutely. Maybe we'll require Gerrit 4.0 because we'll need to break down some of the parts. At the moment, as Marty was saying, the moment Gerrit just believe in God from some points of view, right? Because they say, I'm going to write to the repo, and then I believe in God that the reindex will work. But sometimes doesn't, right? And then you're stuck. Or the other way around. I believe, for instance, when you abandon a change or submit the change, Gerrit believes in God because we do a deletion of the open index and create and declose index. We do in parallel, and we don't check the return status. We believe that everything is going to be right. It's going to be okay. It is going to be okay 99% of the times, but if you are like Qualcomm or NVIDIA or you name it, that does millions or billions of operations, then even 99% is not good enough. So if you think about the 1% of failures, or 1 billion, is enormous, is incredible, right? And that means inconsistencies that you create, right? From that point of view, again, the reporting was very clear, so it was done by Danny of our team. And we looked at the code, and looking at the code, I say, that is clear that that was wrong. How can you do a delete and a create in 2 parallel threads without even checking anything at all, right? And then you believe that everything is going to be okay. So it was our mistake in the code, of course, and of course in the review process. But we have a commitment to solve your problem. Yeah, that's the long answer. Sorry about that. Any other questions?
I just wanted to add something quickly that. So yeah, definitely opening an issue with the most descriptive. But even if you're not proficient in Java or you feel like you don't, I think sometimes opening a change that you know is not good, it's a good conversation starter for. I mean, this is exactly what code review is about, right? So it could be a good ground for then a good, healthy conversation to develop, and the result will. We will get 2 results out of it, right? One will be that hopefully people will join in and help you fix that thing, and then you will learn it, for next time, so that you will become more proficient in that over time. Yeah.
Other questions?
So one thing along that lines is, the vibe coding thing is a joke, but not really. And of course, the hardest thing is testing, not the coding. So, if you can contribute that, even if your code looks like junk at first, we can help you make the code look good. But if you have the resources to actually test something, that's huge.
Hi, so follow-up question, since we're talking about vibe coding. Does the project via the maintainers, do you have any, I guess, policies on AI-assisted or generated code? Like, is there anything that you're looking for? Do you accept it? Do you require annotations? Anything on that general subject?
Yeah, I believe that has been actually raised in other projects. For instance, in the Git project that's been raised. And for instance, in the Git project, the answer is basically no, you cannot do vibe coding. You need to, let's put it this way, you need to demonstrate that the code is yours, even if it was suggested by AI, let's put it this way. So pure vibe coding by saying, like the one that, let's say Scott mentioned, by saying, can you do this for me? And then Claude is doing this for me. Okay, that's my code. That's not your code. Claude wrote that code, right? And you just ship it like it and hoping for the best. So with regards to Gerrit, I believe I raised the question on the mailing list and also with the other maintainers. And the official position from Google was that there is already a kind of chapter, let's put it in this way, in the contributors guide that say that that should be your work without explicitly mentioning AI, because it looks like that people already use AI at the moment. So they don't want to exclude those people that are contributing, and they don't want to stop them from using AI. If you want my point of view, I'm going to tell you one thing. So typically when I see, it's really clear when a patch is coming from pure vibe coding, right? Because it's rubbish, right? So because it's really doing a lot of boilerplate, it's not really thinking around the context, is just basically just code thrown there. And I believe Tony's talk was really good, because from that point of view, it really shows you that if you throw that type of patch on the mailing list and you say, I did this, and you put in reviews, as Martin said, the problem is not coding. The problem is reviewing and testing, and that takes a lot of time. And the point is, if someone is using AI, just doing vibe coding, taking 5 minutes, throwing a patch, and they expect, let's say, the maintainers to spend maybe 2 days of their time looking at code that actually doesn't make any sense, that is not respectful. So if you want my point of view, but then, of course, the other maintainers may have a different point of view, even if it's not explicitly written, I would say that vibe coding, pure vibe coding, is going to be disregarded by people by saying, I got other things to do than looking at all the code that you generated, and you didn't even dare looking at it before, right? But there is no formal policy. But personally, I wouldn't, let's say, review a piece of code that is explicitly vibe coded and then is massive. You could have done the same thing in 3 lines of code instead of 3,000, right? And just because I've got much better things to do, right? And maybe the other maintainers, would you want to say something on vibe coding?
Sure. I guess that won't really be different than what Luca just said, but obviously people use agents and we have to somehow accept it. It's a wave, cannot stop it with stick. And again, they will do that. Throwing over the fence, as I mentioned during my presentation, doesn't make sense and it's not efficient. They can use that, but they can be smart enough to verify it. If you know how to verify it, that's half the work done. Even if you do that, if you vibe code part of the solution and then you verify it works, at least you can summarize it and tell what did you actually achieve with it, and potentially from the problem perspective, it could be useful. But just throwing the change that Luca described, 5 minutes of your prompting and then throwing the massive whatever over, that won't work on scale and will be actually frustrating for any other people. I mean, for you as well, because you will get smashed, period. Right? Anything to add? Martin? Yes.
I was assuming you're a coder and that you could do something with the vibe coding, not just throw it over the wall. So I do think the policy, there was an official policy. It wasn't very clear to me, but I think it said something along the lines as long as you can claim to be able to contribute the code, that it's okay.
Yeah. So the official policy says that you can, as long as you understand what is there and you make sure that that is your work, let's put it this way. Because when you subscribe and you're allowed to push data to Gerrit, you actually transfer your ownership to Google. So you're basically just giving all the work you're doing, you're donating to Google and to the Android project. And in that donation, you have to sign that whatever you've done is coming from you. Then, of course, you use tools, right? It's not from you writing every single bit of the microcode. Of course, we use tools. But as long as the AI is a tool for coding, that is good. If it is the pure work of AI, and you don't have a clue what AI wrote, and you can't even answer comments, because you post a patch, and then the other maintainers will say, why you done it? You cannot say, I don't have a clue, AI said that for me, so I believe that will be good. That is clearly not your work, and then is even forbidden by the license.
Yeah, my fear is what happens on the code review side of it, because, you know, I think as reviewers, we have the responsibility of the added responsibility nowadays to take care of that, you know, to be like the, you know, gatekeepers of this inflated amount of code. And I think my fear is what would happen if, you know, on the reviewing side of things, you would just, you know, end up doing the equivalent of like, you know, just you know, copy pasting that somewhere and say, give me a feedback, which is, you know, something that now is very easy to do, and then you just end up being just the man in the middle between two agents, one generating and the other one reviewing the code, right? What's the point of code review at all? So I think for me, finding a good way to prevent this from happening is like, it should be a priority I should be considering in Gerrit. Yeah.
So I guess to contribute a little to the discussion, hopefully, the Linux Foundation, I guess, developed an AI contribution policy for their projects, and the Open Infra Foundation did that as well before they merged into the Linux Foundation and modeled it after it. And I think all of that was also after the Apache Foundation did their guides. And so I think there are other, and a lot of them are very similar, and they raise the same kind of things that you did, right? That basically, I think all of the communities want to be encouraging of people using it as a tool, but especially in open source projects, there is concern about, there's a couple of concerns about the intellectual property aspects. Like, did the AI produce something that one, doesn't infringe on copyrighted code in its training data, then two, does it represent something that can actually be incorporated into the project? And so that sort of goes to your you know, do you assert that this is something that you own and you can contribute and that sort of thing? So I think there's some models out for that.
Yeah, I wanted to add, yeah, I definitely agree that's the major issue, so the intellectual property, right? And I believe intellectual property is a problem when you can clearly, say, associate what is your contribution to the lines of code of some other projects. And the problem is nowadays, because AI is harvesting all the open source without, at times, I don't want to pinpoint anyone, but at times some AI companies, they are driven by investors and not really driven by lawyers. They are checking every single lines of the license. And I don't believe that when they harvest that data, they go into the license file and do a kind of syntactic analysis of all the different clauses of the license. Not all the licenses are equal, yeah? So from that point of view, yeah, that is one issue, of course, and that is going against the signature that you've done, right? So yeah, I contribute to Gerrit, I sign the CLA, and I say that what I contribute is my work. And if I'm not actually doing that and just getting vibe coding from an AI platform that is crunching a different license, it could be even just maybe a GPL. Then I'm getting some GPL code into Apache 2. That is completely legal. So as a community, if I just rubber stamp that and I don't review and I don't ask questions, then of course, me, I'm kind of, say, agreeing to illegal practice, right, from that point of view. But I agree with you. We should put something in place, but of course, Gerrit is a project driven by the community, but the main owner of the license is Google. So we'll feedback that to Google again. Actually, the next month, in November, the next Gerrit Means is going to be in Munich, in the Google headquarters, and there will be the Google maintainers. Yeah, so they are really kind of a very loud silence in this room, let's put it this way. And we can ask the same question to them directly, face to face. And let's look if they got a different answer. But they are right from that point of view that we've got already the legal framework in place. But I agree with you, being more explicit with this rise of AI is going to be useful to give more clarity, right? Other questions, or shall we go for dinner? More questions. Good. We can even continue with the questions over dinner, right? Oh, you got it, right? Okay.
Just a small follow-up question. Have you noticed many people that have uploaded changes that are pure vibe coding?
So your question is, do we have a lot of developers that are actually submitting patches in this way?
Pure.
I saw some of them coming.
Okay.
At least they were honest with that. So what I saw is that there were people on the mailing list saying, I just used ChatGPT and I created this plugin, right? Can you guys have a look because I don't have a clue what it did? At least they were honest, right?
I haven't seen that, but I've seen a lot of users in my corporation vibe coding and slamming our servers with the output, taking them down. And then you ask them, what's your code doing? They don't really know.
So continue on the contribution from the community. Where do you see that the community could help the maintainers in terms of to get started and to also help you in some specific area like metrics, some Docker containers, this kind of stuff? So do you have any specific area that you see that it could be useful? More hands?
No, for me, like in general, like highlighting the pain points of the companies you work for, your experience is the most useful thing, because I was talking to Martin yesterday, and the reality is that you can only fix problems in Gerrit that you're able to see, but you're only able to see a subset of the problems because you only have one specific context that you're using it for, right? So we're using it, you know, in Gerrit Hub, for example, that would be my experience, right? You use it in your company, it would be your experience. So for us having another take, another angle on those problems and highlighting that there is a problem that we're not even aware of, I think that would be a good way to drive the direction of the next set of, you know, changes and improvements that we can make.
Yeah, I like to answer in the way that Sean was answering. That is, it seems strange, but his first answer was, why don't you start with documentation? Not for saying, please start with something that is not coding, but actually because documentation really matters, right? Because the point is, when you raise a bug, they say, oh, Gerrit is doing this, I was not expecting that, right? And that's the concept of a bug, right? And the problem is that sometimes we as developers, we don't really pay enough attention. I believe we pay attention, but not enough attention on updating the documentation together with the change. And why that matters? That matters because it tells you what is the intent of the change that we did in the code. And if you don't know the intent, basically, there is no point even starting reviewing. That's why we are really picky. So Tony is right. We're really picky with a commit message because actually, that's the most important part of your change, the commit, right? Because commenting on the commit message to say what lines of code you're changing, come on, I went to school, I know what Java language is. I know what you changed. The big question is why you did it, right? And what was the intent of what you did? So commit message and documentation. So whenever someone is reporting some problems on Gerrit, I straight look at the documentation by saying, what should it do? Because don't get me wrong, we are maintainers, but we don't know every single line of code of Gerrit. Sometimes you guys know Gerrit more than us, right? Because maybe you'll be struggling with some kind of code cases that we are not aware of. So the first thing, when you see a problem, go into the documentation and say, what's the way that it should work? And if the documentation doesn't make sense, just create a change by saying, that doesn't make sense at all, right? And that is the very first point, because before going into the code, if you don't understand what's the intent of the code, there is no point. The problem is not the programming language. The problem is what the feature should do, right? So that's the very first part. And also myself, I typically try to get to the very first change that created that specific functionality and look at the documentation to understand what the real author of this feature wanted to achieve, right? So that is very helpful from my point of view.
Just to follow up on what Luca said about the commit message. So we did the upgrade from 3.4 to 3.9, and the release notes, they say a lot, but you need to go sometimes, because I'm not just copy pasting the release notes from upstream, so for our users, but I was also, this time I was also going through the changes of the release notes, but there was some times that I had to go to the change itself and the commit message to really understand what was the change that was happening, to also pass that information to our end users. So they are really important on that regard.
Yeah. And when I mean documentation, including release notes, right? Because you have 1, 2, 3, 4 release managers as well, because we all made releases, and it's tough. To write release notes is really tough, because it's not a pure copy and paste of the commit message, because sometimes you've got 10 different commits to create a feature, then you need to do a synthesis of that. And if you found, let's say, discrepancies or problems, or just create a change straight on the release notes. And this is what I believe is really helpful, to see the community that instead of, and unfortunately, I saw that behavior sometimes on the mailing list, say, guys, I found this problem. Can you guys fix it because it's urgent? And I've got a problem in production. And I say, okay, can you help us fixing it? Okay, no, it's your job, right? And just a user of Gerrit, it's your job to fix Gerrit. Can you please do it? And that is not helpful behavior, right? Because, of course, if you want, let's say, a support contract, there are companies, there is also a page, it's called Support Enterprise. You create a contract, you go to SLA, that's okay, right? But if you are part of the community and the software is completely free, doesn't mean that it's free. It means that instead of paying with money, you pay with your own time, right? In that, you need to show cooperation. In that case, you find problems or release notes. After dinner, you create a changeable review straight away. I'm really happy to fix it, right? Because I'm sure the release notes are full of problems. And we are more than happy to amend them, right?
To be honest, I did not notice any problem. But
now you're gonna do
maybe
it.
I was not paying attention.
I just hear Luca everywhere. No, so great that you managed to do that. I think that's amazing, actually. It means you had the confidence of going and do it. The commit message was, did you get to the bottom of it?
Yeah.
You understood what it was? Yeah.
I was not understanding what was the point, and then reading the release notes, I like copy paste part of the release notes with also giving some context from the commit change.
So one thing we do regarding the release notes, there is a label in Gerrit that forces you to add a footer to the commit message with the release notes, okay? And then if you don't think it should be included, you say skip, okay? But you must do this explicitly. And there is a little bit of a disconnect between what people think is important and what actually is important. Sometimes there are some release notes skip. There are breaking changes in stable branches and so forth. So when we do the release notes, obviously we pay attention to the release notes footers that are explicit, because people wanted those to be mentioned explicitly, right? But there could be some implicit skippable release notes that actually are really, really important. So we do our best to actually skim through that, and we haven't found a good way to automate this process yet. That doesn't generate release notes. They are not really terrible. So we are still doing this one by one, like old style. And so it could be that we just miss some of those. So that's going to be a perfect way to do the first contribution, yeah.
Yeah, I tried with AI, obviously. Why not? But it was months ago. It was terrible, as already Tony said. But I will try that in future again, because first of all, I know better and how to prompt it more properly and give it context. And I keep my fingers crossed because it's a manual labor and it's tedious and nobody likes it. Reviewers don't either. There is one who likes it. Okay, I mean, you can do it. I mean, no, I'm just joking, jokes aside. I'm going to try this exercise again in future with hopefully better outcome, and we'll see how that works. Yeah.
Just one thing, I want to say why I like writing release notes, because actually, I believe I really, when I write the release notes, I go to the changes, I read the code. And that's the way I learn about features that other maintainers wrote. And I believe it's really good. You learn so much in reading code rather than writing code, right? So let's put it this way. Everyone talks about AI, but I'm a believer that we should work also a lot in NI. What is NI? Natural intelligence, right? We shouldn't be lazy in just avoiding learning things just because, oh, AI can do it. I can do it as well, and I can learn as well. I've got a brain, right?
Yeah, so you were talking about generating release notes maybe from commit messages. I think that's a very difficult thing. I've looked into it myself before, and I think commit messages are not really, designed for this. They tell you why a change was made, but maybe are not in a format that's suitable for users to access. But you also mentioned that sometimes, for example, breaking changes get skipped in your release note generation. And I wonder if you could use something like conventional commits, which has a way to explicitly indicate a breaking change to not generate the release notes, but to highlight that sort of thing in your release notes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be a good idea. I think part of the problem sometimes it's that people don't realize that that's a breaking change. They think they fixed something, or you fixed. I'll give you an example. I think we spoke yesterday with someone, I don't remember, but there was a bug in Gerrit where you would set a timeout, and because of the time unit that was used, this timeout ended up being 1,000 times longer than what you intended, right? So if you set it to 1 minute, it would be 1,000 minutes, okay? Because it was using the wrong time unit. This is a bug, right? So it was fixed, okay? Release note, skip, okay?
But the fix is still breaking though, right?
But the fix is breaking because now every timeout that anyone out there in the world has now is, it's going to be honored correctly, and it's a breaking change. But you don't realize, oh, this person didn't realize it, and how do you even go, semantically going about finding? That's why I think it's important what Luca is doing is just checking those one by one. But obviously it's tedious work, yeah.
No, I agree. That's really hard. Conventional commits would have a way to indicate that as a breaking change, but not if you didn't realize that was a breaking change.
Exactly, yeah.
We talked about change IDs before, putting that in the header of a commit instead of in the footer. Is that something that, what does the Gerrit team take on that? One thing I'm thinking about is if I have it in the header, I have a commit on my machine, how will I be able to map like my commits when I go into the Gerrit GUI? If I can't search for commit change ID because I can't see the change ID on my machine, well, I can use git cat file, but that's not really the normal use. User can't really use that to find the change ID.
Yeah, I had that same concern this afternoon when we were talking about it, and that didn't come up really at the Git user, the Git merge, that idea that we maybe need support in Git for displaying it, for example, like maybe Git log should have it, right? I like seeing that in the Git log, but also if you want to take this further, it would be really nice to have ability to, for example, search for change IDs across branches. Like I should be able to do like a Git branch contains and a change ID, because I've written tools to do that before as scripts, and if it's in Git for real, that would be really awesome. So, but yeah, I don't know that there's been any good discussions with the Git team on that.
I mean, there has been a lot of discussion around change IDs upstream on the mailing list, but it eventually led nowhere because nobody could agree on what the semantics of a change ID actually are. And all the different projects actually disagree with one another that currently have change IDs. Git Butler has it different than JJ, has it different than GerritForge, or Gerrit in general. And because of that, Junior was basically saying, well, until you can agree on what it should look like, we're not going to support them, because it doesn't make sense for the Git project to support them until that point. So we first have to agree on the semantics, but once we have agreed on the semantics, then I very much agree that it should be part of Git. And of course, it should then also be included in things like Git log and other parts where you can easily see the change IDs, but also filter by change IDs, for example.
I do think there was pretty good agreement on what a change ID was post-merge. I think it was pre-merge that more of the arguments were
Yeah,
about.
like the devil is in the details, I would say, because it very much depends on like, would a cherry pick retain it? Would a rebase retain it? If you have to split up the commit, what happens? And there's a lot of different edge cases where we couldn't really figure out like consensus across the different projects for how they should be handled.
Large files, LFS is one way. Okay, people want dinner, but yeah, is there some solution to large files, some rethink that is going on, or is it JJ going to do it in some different way, or maybe GitLab?
So like 2 or 3 weeks ago at the Git merge, I gave a talk about the long roads towards native large file support in Git. The answer is yes, we are working on that upstream in Git itself, but it involves a lot of different things that we will have to do. Some of the projects are already well on the way, like Christian Kudas, for example, are working on protocol extensions to automatically let a client evict or omit certain objects from clones. There is work on introducing pluggable object databases so that we are in a better position to store large objects in the first place. There is there's thoughts about protocol extensions so that we don't have to retransmit large blobs every single time. You want to like only fetch an incremental change for a very large blob. There's also ideas about content-defined chunking. But overall, this will still take a significant amount of time before all of these different projects will land and then come together to basically form a native replacement for Git LFS. But we're working on it.
I mean, most of that progress will probably come from the Git project first, likely.
Yeah.
It'd be great if we had someone in JGit to, pioneer some of that stuff, but I don't know that there's anyone doing that.
Just one thing I wanted to add. In all the conversation I had with clients about large files, they all wanted, let's say, Gerrit to just support Git LFS. I said, I don't believe it's a good idea, because the big problem with the large files is where do you store the data, right? And having Gerrit just supporting technically the LFS protocol, and then you just store the data in the same Gerrit server where everything else is, then even our clients, they were saying, oh, but you're not going to store the data on the repo, right? Because we want to store terabytes of data and whatever. And then we are never going to have enough money, let's say, to pay for that much on NFS or whatever. So I believe the storage is definitely the argument, right? So we need first to get a kind of Google-like storage. Google, they can do it because they don't store on the file system. So if we stop storing the blobs on the file system, and we store in something like, for instance, Cassandra, and as GerritForge, we did actually a prototype. I don't know if, Martin, you remember. You know Hytem that came to a hackathon and did a prototype of a Cassandra backend for the blobs in Git. And I demoed live in Mountain View and Charleston Road. And the code is still there, right? So, and that was amazing because it was using Cassandra as backend. They can use whatever cluster they want, even of inexpensive storage, using replication. That will be the answer. But until we got that point of a pluggable blob storage in Git, I believe everything is going to be a workaround, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. Like pluggable object databases are part of the solution to store them somewhere else entirely. But we also have other ideas like with promissory modes, for example, we want to eventually have the mechanism that we can offload large blobs to a different server by, like whenever you use like partial clones, and the client or the server side would then basically announce, like here's a couple of promises, and this specific promiser, for example, uses AWS as storage backend. And then you would have a storage or a transport helper locally that knows how to contact that AWS instance and download the large files from that specific server so that you don't have to store it in the GitLab server anymore or in the Gerrit server, for example. But that is another project that we'll also have to eventually do. Like a lot of the parts are already done here in this context by Chris. But like one of the bigger missing things still is like to have like maybe official transport helpers in Git that allow you to do that so that users don't have to manually download and set them up, because that is not something that the Git project can do right now.